Good afternoon. Welcome to the October meeting, of the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society. My name, of course, is Jonathan Stair. I'm president. I'm glad that you're all here. I don't see any first-time attenders, so glad all you came back. We're going to start with Richard Robinstein reading the minutes from the August 28th meeting.
Well, this board meeting was held on the 28th of August at the York History Center. Those in present, do I read all this? Is that what you want? Or-
Yeah.
It's Jonathan Stair, president. He called the meeting at 4:30 p.m. Members present was Becky Einstein, Mindy Sauer, Tom Gibson.
Are you reading the board minutes or the?
Oh, yeah, I am. You don't want that. You want the other.
No, they're already on record. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. This is a lot going on right now. John Strait opened the meeting at the York History Center with a short discussion of upcoming events. He provided some insight into the direction and goal of his program, of his position, I'm sorry. The last 2 months minutes were not officially approved until after the board meeting. No minutes were read at this program meeting. Margaret gave Jonathan the treasury report numbers to read. August opening balance was $16,599.04. No further information was given due to the information that was given to Jonathan time. Members for August was 118, 4 new members, 28 were not renewed, 2 have paid for 2 years. Jonathan announced the 2 board positions were filled, the secretary being filled by myself, Richard Robinstein, the director of publication filled by Eric Runkel, while currently performing work on the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogy newsletter. Director of Public Relations is still up in the air. The South Central Pennsylvania Genealogy Society member voted to officially add Rick Robinstein and Mindy Sauer to the board of rec as recording secretary and director of large, respectively. Carol Smith filled in for Nicole Smith, announcing upcoming programs and activities for the History Center. Vice President Richard Kunkel introduced the speaker, Lynn Nelson, presenting the using online deeds and the family history records, and the program ended at 4 p.m.
Okay, any additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, they'll stand approved as read. Next is treasurer's report and membership reports from Margaret.
Okay, we have a few to go through. We have from June, July, and August, and September. I was away for a little bit. Okay, we're going to start at June 1st, 2022. And Richard, I have papers for you, so you won't have to write all this down, okay? All right, opening balance was $15,415.33. Receipts, membership renewals of $1,780, new members $130, publication sales $75, and donations $50. Total receipts of $2,035. Disbursements in June, postal connections for the May-June newsletter of $137.57. To the Postal Service for mailing, publication 87. That was a miscellaneous mailing, $4.45. York History Center reimbursed for archival material purchase for the library, $800. Total disbursements, $942.02. Cash balance at June 30th and July 1st, $16,508.31. Membership renewals of $570, new $35, publication sales of $23, donations of $40. Total receipts for July, $668. Disbursements to NACHIP for a donation towards the Mardella Brenneman Scholarship, $200. Cash balance at July 31st and August 1st, $16,976.31. There were no receipts for August. There were, I've combined August and September on this because there were no receipts for August. So, but in September, the receipts were membership renewals of $415. And that was all there. Then I have to, with doing PayPal, and in order to keep the books straight, I'm going to be reporting our PayPal income and fees separately when I do this. As I said, it helps me to keep things straight because that fee that we pay them, it kind of gets things a little screwed up for me. So the PayPal membership renewal received $155. Our fee was $5.51. So we netted $149.49 out of that. That gets added to the $415. Disbursements for August, September to the Postal Service for our box renewal, $322. To athletic lettering for the lettering of the winners of the Henry J. Young Award, $14.10. To Becky Anstein, miscellaneous mailing of $8.69. To Weebly, which is our website, the host of the website, $254.40. And as I understand, that's for 2 years. Postal connections for the July-August newsletter of $135.98. And we paid Pennsylvania sales tax in the amount of $10.57. So the cash balance at September 30th, 2022, $16,789.55. Okay, membership. Okay, we have 123 members. We had 32 renew for the 2-year membership, which feel was really pretty good that brought that in. And we have 5 new members for this year, 4 deceased, and that was from the past year. And then we have 23 that have not renewed. They will be receiving a little letter asking them, did they just forget or whatever. So we'll do that. Of the members, we have 20 life members. We had one withdraw. She had to go into a nursing home and her daughter wanted to stop the mailing and that. So we've lost one of the life members and we have 9 families amongst our membership. And Erica, who handles the emailing of our newsletter, she notified 9 of the ones in the email list that had not renewed, and 2 of those have responded that they'll renew. So we're hoping for more. Any questions? Okay, that's it.
Nicole, anything from History Center?
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming today, even though it's rainy and dreary out. Just a couple upcoming announcements from the History Center. Our second Saturday speaker is Lynn Matlock Brooks, who will be speaking about the history of dance. Our York Civil War Roundtable on October 21st will feature Cody Esch speaking about the Lutheran Seminary in the Battle of Gettysburg. And then our all-bet speaker in the fourth Wednesday in October is Gary Lehman, who was in the Air Force in the 1960s. This program is being recorded and will be available on the York County History Center YouTube channel. And for more information about our programs, please visit yorkhistorycenter.org. And don't forget, our Oyster Festival is happening in person this year on October 17th. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And to follow up what Nicole was saying about the Oyster Festival, our society will have a table there. And if you would like to help volunteer to staff that table, we can use all the help that we can get. Hopefully we'll have enough people to cover it for the 5 hours that that festival goes on. It starts at 11 o'clock and ends at 4 o'clock. And so we're looking for anybody to help us with that. And Margaret mentioned the plaque for the Henry James Young Award. I just wanted to show you that what it looks like. This will be hanging in the library, right? So we did get the names on it. This time I'm going to ask our Vice President Richard Kunkel to come and tell us about future programs and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Jonathan. Our next program after today is going to be on Sunday, November the 6th, and yours truly will be the speaker. It's called Revisiting Online Research of German Ancestors. Gave a similar presentation maybe 5 years ago. I know it was before COVID, but I seem to lose track of how many years have gone past since all that happened. A lot has changed. There are a lot of things that are online. Basically, I'm going to be covering 4 major websites: archeon.de, which is a mostly Protestant church record site; matriculaonline.eu, which is mostly Catholic records, and that is a free site; and familysearch.com, which is of course the LDS site, which has quite a few records, many of which are indexed and indexed fairly well; and ancestry.com, which has quite a few records, some of which are indexed, some not indexed quite so well. So also going to talk about some of the regional archives in France and Switzerland, the places in France are where there were German-speaking populations, and those department archives have very rich resources that you can access at home. Likewise, the Swiss archives of the various cantons. We have no meeting in December. January is, I have to come up with a better title for it, but for lack of a better name, it's show and tell. Please come and share some of your findings, and if you have an interesting artifact or just a good story, you can come and enlighten us and get some feedback or discussion or whatever. February at this point is Rodney Barnett, who has done extensive work on his own genealogy. He's the organist at the Episcopal Church here in town, and has some diverse African-American ancestry, and now he's done some things with DNA as well. Some interesting findings there. March is Jonathan, our president, is going to speak. April, now we have Tyler Stump from the Pennsylvania State Archives, and he will speak about prison records at the archives. And if you don't think you have anyone who was in prison, if you poke around long enough, you will probably find someone. And those are very interesting records, and they've just recently received quite a few records. He was telling me on the phone, there was a prison in Center County that was basically a farm, and people from the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, they shipped a bunch of them there, the ones that were able-bodied, so they could work. So he'll have a lot of interesting stories to tell us in April. In May, we are doing a tour of the St. Luke's Staley Cemetery near New Bridgeville in Chancery Township. They're celebrating their 250th anniversary. That will be presented by June Lloyd and Jean Robinson, both of whom are members of that congregation, and both of whom have had relationships with our organization as well. Right now, I do not have a meeting scheduled for June. I don't have a speaker set up. Still working on that one. Our speaker for today is Charles Chip Kaufman, who's an adjunct faculty member at York College, Pennsylvania. He is very talented with languages. He has taught courses in Italian, German, Russian, and other languages. He's a retired certified U.S. government linguist and author of various articles on languages and linguistics. His topic today is Indian languages influence in the Susquehanna region. So we're looking forward to this a good bit. I have to tell you all a little story before we launch into this. I went to Dickinson College in Carlisle and worked at the college archives there as a work-study program. And the lady who was in housekeeping, she was an older lady. Her name looked like Chloe, but she called it Chloe, and you dare not call her Chloe. And she went to the public schools in Carlisle. And the creek that runs north of Carlisle is the Connedaguinet, which is very clearly an Indian name. But she swore and declared to me that in school they told her when the early settlers came, they said, "Can a dog go in it?" And that's how it got its name. And she wasn't going to be moved anyway, but that wasn't how it got its name. So without further ado, please welcome our speaker today, Chip Kaufman.
Pues, Kaneko Wakan. Osio. Dohije, Osigwo. Ostasunale, Chip Kaufman Doa. Salagis to Waneha. Wado. I just greeted you in Susquehanna. No one knows what it sounded like, but we can approximate because there are living sisters of Susquehanna. So we can approximate that. Linguists are able to do that. I started with Susquehanna, and I finished with its southernmost sister, Cherokee. Cherokee is related to Susquehanna. So how did I get interested in American Indian languages and the languages along the Susquehanna? Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. I like to walk around. It gives me more steps on my Fitbit. So, I do like to walk around. My students know that, so they don't fall asleep, bang their head on the desks. Growing up in Lancaster, I had a mother who taught in a one-room schoolhouse, taught Pennsylvania Dutch. And I had a father who lived over in New Holland. And he grew up speaking a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch, but he thought he spoke English. But I said, Dad, you really spoke a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch. So all the hiking and things that we did along the Susquehanna River, Tuckwan Glen and all these places, Chickies Rock and so forth. As a child, I became more inquisitive about where these words came from. So today I'm going to share some of this. I could probably talk for 4 or 5 hours on this. It's a nice rainy afternoon. We could have a nice big mug of tea and enjoy the words about the American Indian languages spoken along the Susquehanna. A little of this will get linguistic. I decided to keep that in. I think that you might enjoy some of the complexities. One of the misconceptions about American Indian languages is that because they were spoken by people who were primitive, they did not speak a sophisticated language. American Indian languages, on the contrary, are among the most complex in the world. And I'll explain some of that and why they are considered complex. Okay, so that guy is not me. All right. So I said, Squay, that's Susquehanna. I do have to say this, for those of you who are Susquehanna River fans, I've traveled around the world. I've seen some of the famous rivers, the Danube, the Yenisei, the Don. I've seen so many rivers, the Rhine. I lived on the Rhine River. And this is, without a question, the most beautiful river I've ever seen. So if you're from York County, be proud of it. York and Lancaster County. Okay, so today's talk, you have your little handout there. I won't go through these because you have the handout. You can check off as I'm going along. How do we draw conclusions about languages, people, cultures, and practices, customs, and so forth? We do it with the big four. Now, sometimes you don't have one of them. And one of them is the historical record. You being history buffs naturally like to rely on the historical record. I know that Jonathan is into archaeology. This happens to be a stone. I was a little patronizing when I put this slide in here. This is a stone that I found that it was determined to be over 6,000 years old, found right here in York County in the area of Camp Security. My apologies. Okay, so how do experts come up with these conclusions about what the American Indians did or didn't do? They do it through archaeology. They do it through genetics. You can do that with blood types. You can, if you have carbonaceous material, anything that grew, plant material, hair, anything can be used as to determine how old it is. And you can actually do some genetic studies on that, especially on human remains. Then you have linguistics, which is where I come in. So I have a disclaimer here that I am not an expert in history. So I'm kind of humbled to be here to speak to a group of historians. I'm not an expert in history, but I am a comparative linguist. What do comparative linguists do? They compare languages. Comparative linguistics overlaps with historical linguistics. So if you're a historical linguist, you have to learn a little bit about the history, and that's one of the side benefits that I've really enjoyed. Okay, and then you have the historical record down here. Fortunately, with Gesundheit, I don't know how to say that in Susquehanna. The historical record, fortunately and unfortunately for Susquehannock and some of the other languages that are related to Susquehannock, there is some historical record. And the word Susquehanna has a whole bunch of meanings. I mean, I hear people at Starbucks that, oh yeah, Susquehanna, well, you know, that means deep river, and no, that means dark river, and no, that means river that flows to the south. Everybody has an idea about what the word Susquehanna means. I'm going to tell you today in a little bit, and part of that comes from the historical record from Captain James Smith. Okay, so early history. I like to do this because it gives people an idea where the first inhabitants came from. I use the word first inhabitant. I use early Americans. I use indigenous people, and I use the word Indians because all of the existing tribes across America now prefer the word Indian. They prefer their own tribal name, like Shoshone or Omaha or however. And yet many Americans like to say Native Americans. They weren't Native. So the early history is important. But if you use the word Native American, don't beat yourself up. I use it too. So, all right. When I went on the Trans-Siberian Railroad across Russia after I retired from my government job, I really wanted to go back to Russia. I was a student there in the Soviet Union, and I wound up here. The Trans-Siberian goes all across and right down to here, but I decided to cut through Mongolia. And in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of Mongolia, there is a room that is probably 3 stories high. It's like a huge gymnasium in their museum, their historical museum, and they have a huge map, and they show all of the migratory patterns of people from this area right in here, predominantly Mongolia, that's this country, and they went across the Bering Straits, what we call the Bering Straits. That's the Pharyngeal Theory, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So most genetics, archaeology, they actually did radiocarbon dating on human feces that they found that were frozen in caves for thousands of years. So they go back 15 to 19,000 years from that, for that march. So, okay, so here's the Pharyngeal Theory going across the land bridge because we were in an ice age. They were looking for food. They were following mammoths and other animals, and the bones from archaeology bear that out. And so you can see the patterns. They went across. The Athabascan languages are all up in here, Na-Dene down in here, and then you have the Ute-Aztecan languages, and they all start branching off. And we have the woodlands over here. So this is the woodlands area. And I'll talk about the 2 major language groups. But branching off, so you see thousands of years of migration, because the world is not flat. And the world is a spherical obloid. And when you go across a spherical obloid, you don't realize how close one area is to another. One of the things I like to bring up is how a language spoken in Alaska today is also spoken in Greenland, because they were able to go right across that landmass to Greenland. It's actually closer than if they had gone down to the present continental United States. So by the time the Europeans arrived, there were dozens of diverse language families. So a language family can be as small as 4 to 6 languages, and as many as the Indo-European language has 440 languages that are known. So you have in California, there were many dozens of language families, and there were thousands of languages spoken in California. So I'm going to get over to Pennsylvania, and I'm going to get close to the Susquehanna because that's the focus of this talk. So the languages in the Northeast. Here's a Pennsylvania historian, Paul Wallace. Many of you have probably heard of him. Early man in Pennsylvania left no written language records on stone, clay, or parchment other than petroglyphs to tell us who he was or what he did. So we don't have that historical record, but we do have evidences. So the petroglyphs in the lower Susquehanna have the highest concentration of anywhere in the Northeast. So you have these petroglyphs in the Susquehanna down near Safe Harbor and Holtwood, and they basically are demarcation lines of hunting areas. Above this area is reserved for this tribe, and to denote other sorts of meanings that relate to the tribes. There are 2 main ethno-linguistic groups. Okay, don't be frightened by this word. Ethno means relating to ethnic, and linguistic means relating to language. And you're going to understand what I mean by that in the next few slides as I get into the difference between Iroquoian and Algonquian. So you have the Iroquoian languages, which mainly come from the Finger Lakes up in New York. I have a slide with that on it. And they're Iroquoian. Susquehanna is an Iroquoian language. And then we have the Algonquian languages. The Algonquian languages were spread all across North America and into many parts of the present day United States. So we have the Delaware language, which is also known as Lenape, Lenape, and the Conoy, which is an anglicized word of Gonoese. If you've heard of Conoy, which is north of Mount Joy, there's a little region called Conoy that came from the Gonoese because that tribe was there. So they were Algonquian. They were not related to the Susquehannocks. And then the Shawnee. Shawnee, I have an interesting story about Shawnee. I went to a Susquehanna archaeology club meeting, and they had like a picnic, and there was a woman there that I spoke with, and she was she was into the cults and ghosts, and they were doing some work in one of these houses along the Susquehanna River. And she asked me, she said, we came upon a grave and in that dig, and it was kind of a separate dig, but they had recording material, or they had recording devices where they were able to have microphones in the ground, and they had all sorts of things to find paranormal activity. And she talked to me about it, and she said, we kept hearing this voice on our recordings where the person said, Chokma, Chokma, Chokma. And she said to me, you being a linguist, do you have any idea what that is? I said, well, that's hello in Shawnee. And Shawnee is a language, they were nomadic. It's actually Choctaw from the southern part of the United States. But Shawnee was a relative, the language was related to Choctaw. So I said, it's probably Shawnee, and the Shawnee were in Lancaster County, and they were in York County. Saginaw comes from the Shawnee language. Anyone from Saginaw? It's up near Mount Wolf. Okay, so the Shawnee are Algonquian, and so we had a whole lot of different speakers of different languages in this area. So Iroquoian and Algonquian languages sort of intermixed. The Northeast very clearly is Algonquian. Narragansett. There are interesting stories of, I'm also into Germanic languages, so I'm very interested in the Old Norse of the Vikings, and the Vikings were clearly here, Lanzo Meadow up in Newfoundland, and there are interesting connections between the languages. So this whole area is rich with place names and language influence from these two different language groups. So as I get into this, I'm going to use words that relate to living languages. Living languages are still spoken. And Richard, you'll probably remember this from class. So living languages are still spoken. Children continue to learn it now, albeit at a different rate. Cherokee and Mohawk are languages that were spoken along the Susquehanna River that are still spoken. Mohawk a little less. You have grandpa and the grandkids don't want to learn the language that grandpa is speaking, but it gets handed down from generation to generation. That's a living language. A moribund language is languages that are dying and children do not learn it. It means that it's slowly going away. So Oneida and Seneca, the language that was spoken in the town of Conestoga over in Lancaster was predominantly Seneca language. Also Susquehanna, as their tribes became fewer and fewer in numbers, they started to merge the language because they were mutually understandable. Just like como estás and come state in Italian mean how are you? So you can see those connections. Then a dead language is if it's no longer spoken, but it lives on in a daughter language. So Cherokee lives on, even though the Proto-Iroquoian mother is no longer living or spoken. And then extinct languages, which is, for example, Susquehanna, means that there are no daughters, but it's still spoken, or it's no longer spoken at all. So it's not spoken and it has no influence in any other language that lives. Okay, now this is a busy slide, and all the people who teach you how to give lectures and briefings and so forth, they tell you, avoid busy slides. I need this slide because it helps me explain ethnonyms. Ethnonyms are the general terms for names that we call people. Names that we call people. Exonyms are what outsiders call people. For example, the Iroquois didn't call themselves Iroquois. And the word Iroquois is important to understand Susquehanna languages. Iroquois comes to Iriakau, meaning the dangerous snakes or the vicious vipers. They're like snakes. We're going to call those guys snakes. That's an exonym. So that's a name that outsiders call people. But the Iroquois called themselves Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. So the Susquehannocks were very clearly Iroquois because they were Haudenosaunee, and they were members of the Longhouse. They lived in longhouses. You'd have 5 or more families in one house, and they're long. You've seen pictures. I have a picture of it. I'll show you. And then the Onondaga, which is also related to the Seneca, people of the Big Hill. Mohawk, the Flintstone, the people of the Flintstone, not the TV program, but the people of the Flintstone. A lot of Flint was carried to this area, but it's not indigenous to Lancaster County and York County, as I understand. In the archaeological digs, the archaeologists that were involved there said that Flint was pretty much brought from other areas. Cayuga, people of the Pike. The word Algonquian means allies, and Algonquin is strangers. That's a very interesting contrast between the exonym and the Lenni Lenape, the men of men, or the real people, the original people, where the Delaware means it comes from Lord Delaware, who was one of the early settlers. The word Adirondack is bark eaters. So people wouldn't want to call themselves bark eaters. The word Eskimo means fish eater, but they don't use that word. They use Yupik. Yupik in the Eskimo, in the Yupik language. So the word Huron comes from the French word hur, which means a bristly face. So somebody who has like a bristly face comes from Huron, and they were considered the people of the boar's head. Okay, so that's the difference between exonyms and endonyms. So what the people here call themselves is the preferred way to talk about them. So Algonquian, at the place of the fish eels, spearing the fish and the eels. Here's a map of North America. Many words in Canadian are in Canada. Many of the place names come from Algonquian languages. So here are all the main hotspots for the Algonquian languages. I'm going to go through this quickly. I mentioned how complex the words are. They'll put one whole sentence into a word, kind of like German. The Altstadtsehenswürdigkeiten, one word. They'll put that together, and it's all bits and pieces of meaning, and they run it together. So here you have, he is heard by higher powers. They use interesting forms of inanimate nouns, where they'll have a rock, a certain type of rock made of certain material might have spirits in it. And they'll give that a gender, much like he, she, we, they, and so forth with pronouns. They'll give inanimate and animate meaning to certain, what we would consider inanimate objects. They're polysynthetic, means that they pack all these words together. We have a whole lot of place names in America that come 33% of the states' names in the United States come from American Indian words. Okay, so Iroquoian, the Ongwe, I don't know why that slide drifted up. It was fine on my screen today. I mentioned Genealogical, and they put the French suffix on it, oy, wa, the wa. So we call it Iroquois. So here's one of the longhouses. This is a depiction of a longhouse because archaeologists are able to determine what they look like. The Iroquoian languages range, the large grouping of them were in here, and the Mingo grouping, and Susquehanna was called Mingo by the Swedes. The Swedes were in Delaware, southeast Pennsylvania, and the Swedes called it that language Mingo. I'll talk about that in a little bit. We've got Mohawk, Cayuga, Tuscarora, and so forth. Huron was the 6th nation to join with that federation of the 5 nations up in the Great Lakes. So the Iroquoian languages, some of the things that are interesting, they don't have bilabials. Those are B's, P's, well, so they wouldn't say mama and papa. Those words don't exist, but they have words for them. Many place names in New York and Pennsylvania have Iroquoian origins. So here you can see the confederation of the Iroquois in this particular area, and then down here you have the Susquehanna. So we're getting closer to home here with some of the place names. Okay, so some of the various interpretations that I mentioned. Let me lubricate. Anybody have any questions? Comments? Okay. The various interpretations, Muddy River is one. Great Bay River, because it leads to the Great Bay, Chesapeake. 2 or 3, Long Crooked River. Rocky River, because there are so many rocks and islands in it in some spots. River of Islands. Smooth Flowing River. Falls River. And down at Indian Steps Museum, they have there's a display there, and it says that the Susquehanna, the word Susquehanna means river that flows to the south. But I'm going to dispel all of these in a little bit, okay? I'm going to put my money on the linguistic research and less on the stories that are handed down from generation to generation. Susquehanna is, I mentioned, the most beautiful river I've ever laid eyes on, or I've canoed on the Susquehanna. I've done swimming there. The 440 miles long river. I just drove up to Lycoming, which is an Indian word. I went to college at Lycoming as an undergrad, and we went up for homecoming this weekend. It's just, my wife and I said, "Isn't it magnificent?" It's just a beautiful, beautiful river, the whole way up. So here's a picture of the Susquehanna where it bends. Oh, down here is the bridge going across. My son actually took that picture, and he's not a photographer. That was with his Apple 8 or whatever he has his iPhone. Okay, so the languages that were once spoken in the Susquehanna around York and Lancaster, the Shanks Ferry people, the language that they spoke is unknown. Who were the Shanks Ferry people? They didn't call themselves Shanks Ferry because Shanks Ferry was an actual ferry business that ported people back and forth. And I'm going to venture a guess in the mid 1700s that they were running back and forth. And
the 20th century.
Yeah, up to the 20th. Yeah. And so that area in Washington Borough is the seat of where the Shanks Ferry people lived. And there's been archaeological work done there. So we don't know what language they spoke. They probably were a distant relative to the Algonquians. Susquehanna, Seneca, and Conestoga is Iroquoian. I mentioned Gonawace, Conoy. The Nanticoke came up from the Chesapeake Bay area in the eastern part of the Chesapeake Bay. And Shawnee, I mentioned Lenni Lenape. Northern Iroquois are up in here. And I mentioned the Susquehanna are extinct. Southern Iroquois was spoken in Dahlonega, Georgia, largely. That was the seat. And when they discovered gold in Georgia and the South Carolina, North Carolina, the United States government said, "We have this great place for you out in Oklahoma. And by the way, you're going to have to walk." And so it's one of America's unhappy chapters. But many of the people, the Cherokee speakers, decided, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to North Carolina and Tennessee and parts of South Carolina. And that's why we have two dialects of Cherokee. We have a Southern dialect and we have an Oklahoma dialect where they went to the reservation. I've shown this slide there. This is the 5 nations I mentioned, and then they added the Huron over here. So the tribes from the east, the largest was the Delaware, also known as Lenni Lenape, which is the real people, the men of men, so forth. And so they're over in here, and then down in here we have Nanticoke and Powhatan from Virginia. And those are all factors in the history of the Susquehanna people around Lancaster and York County. By the way, the word Wawa means wild goose. You probably, many people know that if you go to the beach or you go to Philadelphia area, even Lancaster, I think, has Wawas, and New Jersey. So that stands for wild goose. The tribes to the south, I mentioned Nanticoke, Wicomico, and they're in Maryland, and the Powhatan were in Virginia. Now, these people are important because the Powhatans, because they spoke an Algonquian language and traveled with Captain Smith and the English up the Chesapeake Bay. And when they got to the Susquehanna River, Captain Smith asked his Powhatan translator, "What do you call this river?" And he called it, "The river is muddy today." He misunderstood the question. And he said, "The river is muddy today." And the word for mud in his language was sisku. And the universal word for stream or river is hana. So you have Lackawanna is Lackawanna. Many, if you look around, there are a lot of place names throughout New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania that have Hana at the end of the river name. Now, unfortunately, the English, the Scottish, the Irish, the Scots Americans changed many of these names because they couldn't pronounce them. So they just changed them to McElroy's Inlet and things like that. So here we have, here's the Nanaco named from that river, and here's the Comico over here. And they came right up this way, and here we have the Susquehanna River right into here. You had 3 language groupings. Here's Cherokee, which is Iroquoian, Cherokee. And over in here you have Algonquian languages. And here you have Siouan languages, which come from the Midwest, areas like South Dakota and so forth. Okay, so we're getting closer to this area with Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey. The English were the first to come. There were some Germans. The English were here in this region, 1607, 1608, 1620. The Dutch had a profound influence in New York. Many of the place names around in New York City are named from Dutch language. But what's interesting is they all formed pidgins with the Indian speakers because they had things that the Indians wanted, and like gunpowder and certain leather goods and things that they were able to use. Beer, the Dutch had beer, of course. Any self-respecting Dutchman's going to have some good beer to come along on the ride. So that they learned those techniques and they shared language. So here's Captain John Smith, English explorer, 1608, goes up the Chesapeake Bay, probably stopped to get some steamed crabs and some natty boh on his way up. And he wrote the General History of Virginia. Has anyone read that? Has anyone done anything with this General History of Virginia? It has a whole lot of maps and things. So we have a couple of the pictures that I drew from on here come from this. And he described the Susquehanna and their language. The strangest people, both in language and attire, for their language may well be seen their proportions, it sounding from them as a voice in a vault. And that's the way he described the Susquehannock speakers and the language. And the Powhatan used the word Susquehannock. There are a lot of misspellings or different spellings of Susquehannock. So you'll see this Susquehannock, and that's what the Algonquian speakers used to describe them. So this is the word. The river is muddy today, but I have one more clue on what the Susquehanna might mean. It either means muddy river because the river is muddy today, or it means something else. I'll show you. Okay, so here's like one of the maps for Virginia. So the Susquehanna, the likely word origin is either Sisku from mud and Hana meaning river, or the word Hana is a given. It's the word for river or stream. The Iroquoian word Sasqua means fresh or fresh water. So freshwater river, which is the word I like, because it's going to be muddy one day, and then a couple of weeks later, when it's not raining, it's going to be nice and clear. So it could be muddy river, or it could be freshwater river, Susquehanna. It's a beautiful river. I'm holding in for the latter. The Europeans came, they brought missionaries. The Swedes sent many of their religious leaders here. And there's one guy in particular that I'll talk about, Campanius, and he's the only person who compiled an actual dictionary of the Mingo language, Minque or Mingo language, which is what was Susquehanna. So there are missionaries who did all sorts of work, and they described in their writing that teenagers had an affinity to pick up these American Indian languages that were being spoken here. I mentioned pidgins and vocabularies that were compiled. Here's one for Algonquian. So the word for hey can just mean hello. In Susquehannock, it's que, hey. So here's Campanius. He was the second Swedish minister at Fort Christiana, and he accompanied the governor to the lower part, which is called Nya Sverige, which is New Sweden. And he was a missionary to the Lenni Lenape tribes. And they talked about trading with the Minqua or the Mingos, and they were the Susquehannocks. So if you look at maps and you look at waterways, and we didn't have like nuclear power plants and other turbines and things that were blocking the river. And it's not clear how wide the Susquehanna was when the original inhabitants were here, but the Lenni Lenape were able to come over, and they would come over into Lancaster County and York County and share different sorts of trades and things with the Susquehanna. So Campanius translates a catechismus from German into Lenape Indian so that they could be converted to Christianity. And they developed a Delaware-based pidgin. So there was a pidgin that was spoken in this area that was used for trade. A pidgin is a mix of two or more languages. One has a dominant superstratum that is the main language. Like if you have a French Creole, the main language is French. That's the dominant. And then you have all kinds of other spin-offs like Micmac and things like that. So Campanius compiled the Susquehannock vocabulary. He compiled the Susquehannock. I have a slide that's out of place here. This is still a good slide. It talks about, he translated this, he did this short description of the province of New Sweden and described the speakers of languages in those two areas. So here's the vocabulary: Mahakwasiga for the Minkus, the Mingwa, Mingwe, Mingo, and the trade contact between those people. Unfortunately, he only stayed for 4 or 5 years in New Sweden, and he went back. His son picked up the glossary of 100 words, Susquehannock words, and he further got it published. And fortunately, we have some historical publishing companies in Pennsylvania and New Jersey that are still interested in this sort of thing. So they're able to pass it along. One of the frustrating things, though, is people don't know how words were pronounced because they couldn't understand. Campanius wrote in Swedish, and a J is like a ya sound in Swedish. So, and he also used the Greek letter Omicron to represent a long O. So people didn't know how to pronounce the words in the glossary. So you kind of have to be a linguist to follow along with it. But it's the primary source of knowledge on the Susquehannock language. George Alsop, the Susquehannocks bury all within the wall in a palisade impalement of their city, or a Canandago. So here's a word from in York County that we have, Canandago. A Canandago is a wall, is a huge circular encampment where they would take the tree trunks and they would push them down into the ground, just like a prison at Camp Security. Then here are some other vocabularies. So Susquehannock could be muddy water people. Andaste, this is another word. This was what the French called the Susquehannock people, the Andaste, the people of the Blackened Ridge Pole. Blackened because they would burn the outer part of the trunk so that it wouldn't rot as quickly as if they didn't burn it. So they blackened it, or they made it somewhat waterproof as they put it into the ground. The Mingo Lenape for treacherous. So the word Mingo or Mingo is an exonym that the Lenape used, which means without penis. Oops, sorry. And then another version is Susquehanna Len, which is the Oyster River people. So we have a whole lot of different interesting versions of Susquehanna, but I still like the Clearwater River. Conestoga is Algonquian Conestoga, the place of the immersed pole, people who would put the poles down in the ground, and they would use that for protection because the Iroquois, their brothers and sisters to the north, fought with them. Okay, here's an example of one of the Palisade areas. This is a Conestoga. That's a Conestoga. Did you want to take a picture of that?
Oh, I got it.
Oh, yeah, okay, you're fast. You're fast. Okay. Many of you have heard of Barry Kent. Barry Kent's famous in Pennsylvania, and especially this area. And he said that there's no primary document what the Susquehanna Indians called themselves, but clearly the ones living in Conestoga town over in Lancaster County are related to the Seneca and the Seneca language. So here's a summary of the names of Susquehanna, all of these different names, and we don't know what they call themselves. And that happens in a lot of different ethnic groupings. Okay, place names. This is kind of the wrapping up point for this talk. The place names are very interesting. Unfortunately, many of the place names were changed by English, by Swedish, by German. My family was Swiss, and your talk sounds very interesting, Richard, to get into the Germanic and the Swiss. Okay, so the language legacy, there are 4 types of legacies that they left, and they're all in names. Place names, names of rivers and streams. The first is they use tribal names. So they're Susquehannock. They didn't call themselves Susquehannock, but we use the word Susquehannock today. That goes back to the river name. So we have Susquehanna High School, we have Susquehannock High School, we have a lot of different place names in York and Lancaster counties. And I'm not even getting into Dauphin County and some of the areas around Harrisburg. Names of the streams, we have, for example, Codorus means at the rapids. So for them, there were lots of rapids that came along. Man comes in, and the European man comes in and changes things with industry and so forth. And the Conway is another one of the rivers. Modified place names. So they were originally American Indian names, and because the Europeans couldn't pronounce them, they changed it to something that sounded like the Indian name, but was not the Indian name. So Chickee's Rock is one of them. That was from Chickasawalunga, the place of the crawfish. So if you go over just north of the bridge crossing Route 30, you see the Chickee's Rock is there, and that's from Chickasawalunga. And then there are place names over in Lancaster for Salunga, just the end part of it. And then finally, you have Indian words that were translated into English. Chickanum is Turkey Hill. So the settlers couldn't pronounce it, and they said, "What does that mean?" They point to a turkey in the hill. So that's Turkey Hill. So that's where, if you ever buy gas or pick up things at the Turkey Hill, it really wasn't an American Indian word. York County, I mentioned rapid water for Codorus. Creek that flows there in York County enters from the west. Conawago at the rapids, another one at the rapids. The Washinta, Tawasenta, Mohawk words for waterfall. So we have some areas around York County. Conjohela, kettle on a long upright object. So they felt that the water and the islands, it looked like a kettle on an upright object. It's a Shawnee village, and it's near Wrightsville. Saginaw, I mentioned that, mouth of the river or an outlet is in northeast area up near Manchester. And Accomac, it probably means on the other side. And that was probably given by the Indian tribes who were in Lancaster County. Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I think the Monongahela, that's sort of in what, Lower Windsor Township, that area.
Yeah.
And then there's the question, is that the same as the churches that are out there now? Canadockley.
Canadockley, yes. Canadockley, I believe is an Irish. Is Irish or Celtic.
You think?
Yeah, I think it's Irish or Welsh. Canadockley.
I mean, sometimes they call it Jockley. It shows up at the
Yeah. Yeah, I think Canadockley, I'm sure of, but I think it's a Celtic origin.
Okay, so I
So
don't think they're in the same,
Yeah, that's true.
is it a corruption of that? Monongahela?
It could be. It could be. I'm going to. I'll check it out and get back to you, but I've always thought that it was. It's not Welsh. It's not Welsh. It's, to me, it's either an Irish or a Scottish word.
For few and far between there, occasionally.
Yeah. Well, this area was inhabited by a lot of Scotch Irish in the 1700s. I mean, the Scotch Irish came in the 1700s, so I don't know.
They're more to the south. Though.
Yeah, I don't think it's, well, they were largely up in the Harrisburg area and then went out to the Pittsburgh area. So, yeah, I'll check into it. I still think it's a Celtic word, but it doesn't come up on anything that I've researched as an American Indian word.
Well, I think if it is American Indian, I think it's very much corrupt.
It's a corruption, yeah. And that's the problem. You go, I mean, I went to the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea, and I was looking for all these words that were Celtic and words that were from the Vikings. The Vikings inhabited that area. Robert the Bruce from Scotland was king there in the Isle of Man. And so many of the words were changed to very purely English words now, and they're corruptions. So, yeah, thank you for raising that. I like questions like that. And then Tuckahoe is like a little, almost like a sort of a leaf that floats on top of a water lily, like a water lily, but it's not. Tuckahoe was camp where my son used to do scout camping and so forth. Lancaster County, I mentioned Chickasalunga, Conestoga from the immersed pole, Conway from the town, or from the tribe, the Gonoese. Octorara, this is the name of a creek. The meaning of Octorara is, they speculate it to mean running water. Many of them have something to do with water. Look at all the rivers in the United States, Mississippi and so forth. Peckway means dust or ashes, was a Shawnee village. And I mentioned the Shawnee were nomadic. They were in the South in the United States and they wound up in Ohio. They came along, they would spend 50 years, 100 years and then go. Tuckwan, from Susquehanna means bend in the stream. Has anyone ever gone hiking over there in Lancaster? Tuckwan Glen is just magnificent. It just winds around. Okay, I was going to have some words to teach you, but I think I'm going to pass. We're just going to conclude here. Today, we only have 22 to 30,000 speakers of Cherokee, although it's stable because with all of the technology we have, young people are actually starting to get interested in it because many of the nations, the American Indian nations, are promoting their ancestry through language. And maybe that language that grandpa or grandma speak with all the funny words. I mean, it goes out to the Lakota Sioux and everywhere. There's some of the larger nations are able to generate more interest and they have programs in schools where children are actually starting to learn it. But the number of native speakers are severely curtailing. So it's more of a, you can see the Mohawk here, still speakers of Mohawk. There was a guy out at Nixon Park who spoke, who was Seneca about 10 years ago, and I took my son. And he knew a couple of words in Seneca. He spoke about the Seneca Indian. Susquehanna has 0. So the study of languages here in this area is really rich. It has rich potential for linguists or archaeologists, anthropologists, and there's still a lot that we don't know that could be determined, including what voice came out of that grave from the paranormals. Avarunsi is how you say thank you. Everyone say Avarunsi. I'm going to say Avarunsi. This is not my son's picture. This is taken from Chickies Rock. Punasatande is how they say, I'm leaving now. I hope you will stay well. This is Susquehanna. Punasatande. And this bottom one is one of my favorites. When I retired after 34 years, this was the last thing I said. I said, do da dagahoi. It's actually that question mark with the B is an A sound. Do da dagahoi. And that is Cherokee, which means may our paths cross again. And I kind of like that. Lori Dieter, I don't know if anyone knows her. She probably pronounces it D, or she let me use this photo. Beautiful picture of the Susquehanna. Okay. So that's it. Any questions? Yes.
Another question while we're at.
Yes.
Calico, is that an Indian name?
It is. It is. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means. Sometimes it's just it's not inherently obvious.
It's interesting how you say we don't know how to pronounce some of these things.
Yes.
Because I had an experience in Barb Rudy, who it was noted as well. Some researchers from Ohio years ago, they came and visited here, the ancestors in York County, and they said such and such ancestor lived at Codorus. I just looked at them, where? And they were talking about Codorus Township, York County.
Yeah.
And Barb Rudy, someone back in the library, she's been a long time volunteer. She had someone that said, oh, they lived at Cocalico. And they were talking about Cocalico.
Yeah. Well, having grown up in Lancaster, all the tourists would come by and say, which way to Ephrata? And Lancaster, they call it Lancaster. Yes, sir.
How many speakers are there for the Lenni Lenape, and are there any remaining tribes?
There are, and and because they didn't really live along the Susquehanna, I didn't include them in this. The Lenni Lenape, I'm going to guess probably a couple thousand. And it's unfortunate because it's like the Amish kids. I'll buy blueberries and corn and so forth, having grown up in Lancaster, and I want to speak some Pennsylvania Dutch with the Pennsylvanisch Dutch with the Amish girls, and because dad and the boys are out in the fields and the mom and the daughters are selling the things at the fruit stands, and the young girls don't want to speak because they're one, embarrassed, and two, they want to be seen as more modern. And now they'll use it in the church services and in the anything that's related to religion. They'll use the German from the 1700s, but that's not quite Pennsylvania Dutch. So the Pennsylvania Dutch, they don't want to use it. So I wind up speaking with their mothers. Yeah. So it's kind of, it's on shaky ground, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing with Delaware. But I'm sure there are a couple thousand in Delaware, but most languages in the world, 6,000 in the world, only 100 languages are spoken by 95% of the world's population. So we have almost 6,000 languages that are spoken by 5% or fewer. So the numbers are really against it. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but there are encouraging aspects of it. So, yes, sir.
Can you talk briefly about the Paxton Boys?
Well, the Paxton Boys, I think that was like 1754, in the late 1750s. And the Paxton Boys came down from the Harrisburg area. And the word Paxtang is an American Indian word. Lots of them up in that area. But they changed it, they anglicized it to Paxton. They were from Paxton. And they were just very prejudiced against American Indians, and they wanted to kill all of them. And they had heard that there were some Indians that were being protected in the prison in Lancaster. And they went there at night and killed the remaining ones. So, but there was one Seneca who escaped and kind of, or who got away, found out that they were coming, or when they were coming. It's unclear. And the one person escaped and was able to at least share a little bit about what went on. So, yeah, that's what I know. Does anybody else know anything?
Now, I live very close to where the village was. There's a big rock. And
That's beautiful.
plaque that
Oh, yeah.
was a tree that he signed there.
Yeah.
And they had attacked the village first and killed, I think maybe some of the people were away on something. I don't know what the-
Hunting or fishing?
Yes, exactly. And they came in and slaughtered everybody that was in that village.
Yeah.
And so that's why the remainder were taken into what is now, I think it's within the construct of Fulton Opera House.
Yeah.
Wow. And that's
Wow.
when they came.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, the Conestoga Village, is that different than the Indian settlement that was at Boyer Washington Borough is?
Yes.
Well, Washington Borough was the Shanks Ferry people,
Okay.
but that was around 800 AD. So that the carbon dating that's been done on those remains shows that they were many hundreds of years before the Iroquois and the Algonquian tribes were here.
So where was the Conestoga Village?
And that's down right before you get to Washington Borough, but it's farther inland.
It's beyond where, well, there's a road called Indian Marker Road. River Road kind of winds past,
So is it Manor Township?
it's Manor Township.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a stream that runs kind of parallel to the Susquehanna, and that settlement was right in there. Yeah. Yeah,
What does Peckway mean? And have you ever been in the Peckway cave?
yeah, Peckway, yeah, I have been. As a matter of fact, I have. I mean, when I was a high school guy, once we all got our driver's licenses, we'd go exploring all the time over around Peckway. It means ashes. Peckway comes from ashes. From Pequot. From Pequot. Did you learn anything today? I like to ask classes, and was there one thing that you wish I had said, or is there one thing that you really liked? What was a surprise? Was there?
Well, I guess it actually.
Kanandakli.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a Celtic word. Yeah, I think. But I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna get back to you, Richard.
Well, this actually is one of the questions I'm gonna ask you. From what you have said now, am I to understand that Indian names in this area primarily came from either Algonquin or Iroquois?
Exactly.
So it could be one of.
It could be one or the
either
other.
one of them, yeah.
Yep. It could be one or the other. And there are some roots that you can determine that lend themselves to Algonquian or to Iroquois. So those are the two main language groupings. And so you had the Conoy, you had the Shawnee. So you had some that were here that used Algonquian, and then others that used Iroquois. If I were to flip a coin, I would always want it to come up on Iroquois, because there was so much that Susquehanna River is just like a highway coming down from Iroquoian settlements. So many hundreds of years ago.
I guess I do have one other question.
Yeah.
So many of the creeks, like I said, the Gwinnett is Conestoga, which is further west. The Conestoga, the Onondaga, you all start with a CON. Does that have a specific meaning that means creek or something? Or?
CON.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example?
Well, Conewago.
Oh, yeah.
Gwinnett,
Yeah.
those-
It could have come from Gonawace. it could have come from the Ganaways tribe, which became a Khan. The
That's the
G,
convoy, which is
G and C
Pacific.
phonetically are Paris, the G and the K phoneme. And, but you know, that's another level that I'd like to dig more deeply to find out which ones, because there's so few of them. There are so few of
A
the.
lot of them are
places.
strings and freaks for some reason rather than.
Right, right. Well, and many of the English and the Germans who settled here just said, we're gonna give them names after after someone that we know, or someone who was English or German or Dutch or Swedish. So, okay, well, Avarensi, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, our meeting stands adjourned.
Yeah.